I always dreamed of a quiet life, a little cabin tucked away where the world couldn't find me. That's why I moved to a remote corner of Alaska, surrounded by nothing but endless snow and towering pine trees. It was perfect almost. I had one neighbor, a man named Thomas, who lived just a 5 minute walk through the woods. He seemed friendly enough at first, always waving when he'd see me, even brought me a welcome to the neighborhood pie. For the first few months, things were exactly what I wanted, peaceful. But that peace shattered one freezing winter night. A frantic knock echoed through my small home. It was late, past midnight. I opened the door to find Thomas, his face pale and his breath coming out in panicked clouds. "Someone's out here," he stammered, pointing a shaky finger into the darkness behind him. "I saw them. They're circling your house." My blood ran cold. He said he was going to call the police from his place and told me to lock up tight. I did exactly that, bolting the door and checking every window, my heart pounding in my chest. I sat by the window for what felt like hours, peering into the blackness, but I saw nothing. Eventually, exhaustion won, and I drifted off on the couch. I was jolted awake by a sound that didn't belong, a low, hushed whisper right outside my window. I crept over, my body trembling, and peeked through the blinds. There, standing in the faint moonlight, was Thomas. But he wasn't alone. He was talking to a tall, shadowy figure I'd never seen before. A knot of dread tightened in my stomach. What was he doing? Why wasn't he calling the police? Before I could make sense of it, a deafening crash came from downstairs. The sound of shattering glass. Someone was inside my house. I scrambled away from the window, my mind racing. I had to look again. I had to be sure. I crept back and peeked out one more time. The stranger was gone, but Thomas was still there. He hadn't moved an inch. He was just standing in the snow, his head tilted up, staring directly at my bedroom window. There was no panic on his face, no concern, just a blank, chilling stare. It was then that I understood. He wasn't there to help me, he was part of it. I grabbed my phone, my fingers fumbling as I dialed 911. I whispered my address, explained that someone had broken in, and that my neighbor was acting strange. Then I ran into my bedroom, locked the door, and pushed my heavy dresser in front of it. I could hear footsteps downstairs, slow and deliberate. Every creak of the floorboard sent a fresh wave of terror through me. I huddled in the corner, holding my breath, praying the police would get there in time. Those were the longest minutes of my entire life, just me and the sounds of a stranger walking through my home. Finally, I heard sirens wailing in the distance, getting closer and closer. Then shouting, commotion, and the blessed silence that followed. A police officer eventually knocked on my bedroom door, telling me it was safe to come out. Downstairs, they had a man in handcuffs, the intruder, but the nightmare wasn't over. As the police investigated, they uncovered the whole story. The man they'd arrested wasn't just some random burglar. He and Thomas had been planning this for months. They had been watching me, learning my routine, waiting for the right moment. Thomas's late night warning wasn't a warning at all. It was the signal. He was arrested right there on my lawn. I sold the house the very next week. I couldn't stay there another day. I moved to a busy city, surrounded by people and noise, as far away from the quiet woods as I could get. But even now, years later, I can't shake the image from my mind. Sometimes, when I'm about to fall asleep, I see him, Thomas, standing in the snow, just staring up at my window with those cold, empty eyes. Thanks for listening, and please be careful who you trust. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories. When I was 7 years old, a storm was raging outside. The kind of storm where the wind howls and rain smashes against the windows so hard you think the glass might break. I was at home with my babysitter, Jenny. She was trying to distract me from the scary noises by teaching me a card game, but neither of us could really focus. That's when we heard it, a frantic knocking at the front door, almost drowned out by the thunder. Jenny looked at me, a little unsure, then cautiously went to see who it was. Standing on our doorstep was a girl, maybe a teenager, completely drenched from the rain. Her hair was plastered to her face, and she was shivering, looking absolutely terrified. She sobbed that her car had broken down and begged to use our phone to call for help. Jenny, being the kind person she was, couldn't just leave her out in the storm. She let her in, handed her a towel, and pointed her toward the kitchen phone. The girl seemed so grateful, so harmless. She was dialing the phone when the whole house shook. It wasn't thunder this time. The front door splintered and flew open, and a man burst in. He was big, wearing a dark raincoat, and in his hand, he held a gun. My heart jumped into my throat. The girl on the phone didn't scream. She just lowered the receiver, a cold, calm expression replacing her look of panic. That's when I understood. She wasn't a victim. She was part of it. She was helping him. The man grabbed Jenny by the arm, shoving the gun against her side. The girl started walking through the living room, her eyes scanning everything. Where's the money? Jewelry? Anything valuable? She demanded, her voice no longer shaky and scared, but sharp and commanding. They forced us to stay put on the living room floor while they tore through the house. I remember squeezing my eyes shut, trying to pretend it wasn't happening. I could feel Jenny next to me, her whole body trembling, but she leaned over and whispered in my ear, "It's going to be okay. Just stay quiet. It's going to be okay." Even in her own terror, she was trying to protect me. I'll never forget that. The man kept the gun pointed at us the whole time, his eyes darting around nervously. They ransacked my parents' bedroom. Drawers were pulled out and thrown, their contents spilling all over the floor. They found my mom's jewelry box and a small amount of cash. The girls stuffed it all into a bag she was carrying. It felt like an eternity, but it was probably only 10 or 15 minutes. They seemed satisfied with what they'd found and started heading for the door. The man gave us one last threatening look. "Don't move. Don't call anyone for 10 minutes or we'll come back." My whole body was frozen with fear. I just stared at the broken door, waiting for them to disappear into the storm. But just as they were about to step outside, a bright flashing light cut through the dark, rainy night. Red and blue strobed across our living room walls. A car had pulled up silently in our driveway, a police car. Our next-door neighbor, Mr. Henderson, had been looking out his window during the storm. He saw the strange girl arrive, saw the man break down our door, and immediately called 911. He saved our lives. The man and the girl froze like statues, caught in the headlights. The police were yelling, commands I couldn't make out over the sound of my own heart pounding in my ears. It was over in seconds. The man dropped the gun, and both of them were arrested right there on our front lawn. I survived that night, but a part of me is still that 7-year-old kid on the living room floor. Jenny moved away a few years later, but we still write to each other sometimes. We never talk about that night, but we don't have to. It's a bond we'll share forever. To this day, every time it rains, every time a storm rolls in and the wind howls, I can't help it. I remember the look in their eyes, the cold, calculating stare of the girl and the desperate, dangerous look of the man with the gun. And I remember the quiet bravery of a babysitter who whispered that everything would be okay, even when the world was falling apart. Thanks for listening to my story. If you have a story you'd like to share, let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to subscribe for more. My name is Isadora. I've always believed that a new home means a new beginning. That's why I bought the old house on Willow Street. It was charming, with a history etched into its wooden floors and ivy-covered walls. I imagined filling it with laughter, sunlight, and a future free from the shadows of my past. But from the very first night, I knew something was deeply, terribly wrong. It started subtly. The sound of soft footsteps on the stairs when I was the only one home. Faint whispers that seemed to ride on the drafts, words I could never quite make out. Shadows would dance in the corners of my eyes, only to vanish the moment I turned to look. I tried to explain it all away. Old houses settle. The wind plays tricks. My mind was just tired. But a feeling of being constantly watched, a cold, heavy presence, settled over me and refused to leave. I felt like an intruder in my own home. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through a box of discarded items left in the attic, my fingers brushed against a small, forgotten photograph. It was old, sepia-toned, and showed a young girl, maybe 8 or 9 years old, standing on the very same porch I now called mine. She wore a simple, light-colored dress, and her hair was tied back with a ribbon. But it was her eyes that held me captive. They were dark, hollow voids, completely devoid of any childish joy or light. They looked out from the past with an expression of profound, soul-crushing sadness. It was as if she was already a ghost. Even then, I placed the photo on my mantelpiece, unable to throw it away, unable to look away from those haunting eyes. I felt a strange connection to her, a need to know her story. Little did I know, her story was about to become my nightmare. The whispers in the house grew louder, more insistent. I started hearing a child's soft crying coming from empty rooms. The cold spots in the house became more frequent, more intense, clinging to my skin like a frozen shroud. The real horror began one moonless night. I was jolted awake by a sound that made my blood run cold. It was a scream, a desperate, terrified scream that echoed up from the very foundation of the house. It came from the basement. Every instinct screamed at me to stay in bed, to pull the covers over my head and pretend I'd heard nothing. But a morbid curiosity, a pull I couldn't explain, drew me out of my room and towards the basement door. My hand trembled as I turned the cold brass knob. The wooden stairs creaked under my weight, each step a protest as I descended into the damp, musty darkness. I switched on the single bare bulb, which cast long, distorted shadows across the stone walls, and that's when I saw her. Standing in the far corner, almost blending into the darkness, was the girl from the photograph. She was there in her white dress, just as I'd seen her. But she wasn't a picture anymore. Her form was translucent, flickering like a dying candle flame. Her face was a mask of sorrow, and she didn't look at me. Instead, she slowly raised a trembling, ethereal arm and pointed. She pointed to a section of the basement wall, a patch of newer, clumsier brickwork that stood out against the original stone foundation. It looked like a clumsy repair, a section that had been sealed up in a hurry. She just stood there, pointing, her silent gaze fixed on that wall. The scream I'd heard still hanging in the air around us. I didn't need another second. I didn't scream. I didn't even breathe. I just turned and ran. I fled up the stairs, out the front door, and into the night, leaving everything behind. I never went back. I couldn't. I left my new start, my dreams, everything, locked inside that house on Willow Street. It took me weeks to piece together the courage to ask around, to talk to the locals who had lived in the area for decades. The story they told me confirmed the terror I had felt. Years ago, a little girl had lived in that house. She had vanished without a trace one day. The police searched for months, but her body was never found. The town was full of rumors, whispers of a terrible crime. Some said her father, a man known for his violent temper, had done something unspeakable. The darkest rumor, the one people only spoke in hushed tones, was that he had sealed her away right there in the house, behind the basement wall. I sold the house without ever setting foot inside it again, and I'm not free. The house may be behind me, but the girl is not. Every night, when I close my eyes, I don't see the shadows or the whispers. I see her face. I see those hollow, lifeless eyes staring back at me from the darkness, and I know her story still isn't over.